Walking through the dusty attic of his childhood home, he wasn't surprised to see that it was completely empty. Over the years, a string of new occupants had removed all the furniture and personal effects. His father had built the house back in the 1920s. But he'd hidden something inside. If only Rudy knew where to look. Then he saw a piece of string hanging from the ceiling, and a chill went down his spine. Rudy Schlattner had been a young boy when he and his family had to flee Czechoslovakia. After World War II had ended in 1945, all citizens of German descent were ordered to return to Germany. Rudy's family home was seized, and it became the property of the government. But now, 70 years later, Rudy hadn't forgotten what his father had confided in him all those years ago. Rudy, now in his 80s, had a family of his own. He had put down roots in Germany after his parents had built a new life there for themselves. But it hadn't been easy. Rudy's father had left his job, friends, home, and indeed his entire life behind for the sake of his family's safety. But that wasn't all he had left there. There was a family secret hidden in the walls of that old house. That house that his father had built with his own two hands. And now, Rudy knew he had to go back. Rudy was finally financially stable enough to return to his home country. He had worked hard to make sure that he had enough money to support his children and had accumulated a small nest egg for himself. But money wasn't the only thing that had been holding him back all these years. He had been running away from the painful memories that lived inside that house. But he knew that time was running out. Time had flown in the blink of an eye, but Rudy knew that he still had a few good years left in him yet. After discussing it with his children, he resolved to return to the Czech Republic. It would probably be the last trip he would ever make. It was now or never. He had to know. But his family wasn't about to let him make the journey alone. When the Schlattner family arrived at their destination, Rudy looked at his hometown in awe. The memories all came flooding back. There was the school he had attended and the public library he had spent so much time in as a boy. All the things that had been taken from him were still there, as if he'd never left. It felt surreal as they slowly pulled up to what he had come to see, his old house. But was he ready to see the secrets inside? The house that sat squarely on the rolling green lawn looked just as he'd remembered. The stone front steps, awnings, and even the molded pattern his father had cemented into the wall was still there. He felt like he was living a strange dream, only this time it was real. Since the house had been converted into a care facility for the elderly, he had to ask the caretaker's permission before he was allowed inside. Rudy made a beeline for the attic, his feet taking him there as if of their own accord. He prayed that his father's secret stash was still there. Lord knows what would happen if someone else had found it. After chatting with the caretaker, he knew that there had been numerous renovations done on the old house throughout the years. He dared to think that he was already too late. With his family walking behind him, he climbed the stairs to the dusty attic of his childhood home. He felt a pang of sadness when he saw that all the furniture that had been there when they had left had been removed, gone forever. After pausing for a few moments to let it all sink in, he continued his search. He began tapping on the wooden panels of wood that sloped down to form the A-frame ceiling, and his heart skipped a beat. Rudy knew exactly what he was looking for. He just hoped that the ceiling hadn't been gutted when the house was renovated. He knew the chances of finding his father's secret hiding place were slim, but then he remembered his father's last words. He was looking for any signs of a loose board, and then he saw it. There was a short piece of string hanging from one of the pieces of wood. If he hadn't known to look for it, he would have missed it. He grasped the end of the string and pulled. The wooden board came tumbling down, revealing a secret compartment that had been hidden in the eaves of the house. When Rudy peered inside, he couldn't hold back his tears. The secret compartment was packed neatly with boxes and meticulously wrapped packages. He couldn't believe it. He'd found his father's treasure. With his family's help, they began to move the items out of the compartment. But Rudy knew that there were some logistics to deal with before he began unpacking. With trembling fingers, he called the authorities. Representatives from a museum in the nearby town of Ústí nad Labem arrived and began the massive task of unpacking, categorizing, and dating the artifacts. What Rudy had found was astonishing. A treasure trove of World War II memorabilia, Although some items appeared to be of little value, others were worth a fortune. Just what had they unearthed? "We were surprised that so many ordinary things were hidden there," said museum employee Tomas Okura. "Thanks to the circumstances, these objects have a very high historical value." There were everyday items that offered a rare glimpse into the 1940s, such as old sewing boxes. Others were priceless. Rudy inspected each item in his hands and knew he would cherish this moment forever. Each item held its own story. There were old toys that Rudy and his siblings had played with, a bittersweet reminder of his childhood before they had to abandon their lives and home. There was an umbrella, paperweights, badges, hats, and books. The manager of the museum was dumbfounded by the rare and historical find. Among the items were some small and mysterious metal objects. The museum representatives speculated that the tiny pieces of metal probably belonged to some kind of old piece of machinery that Rudy's father owned, but they were manufactured in Czechoslovakia at a factory that no longer existed. Next, they found an old scale and were taken aback by its condition. All its parts were still working, and there was hardly any rust. They were incredulous. Then there were the paintings. Rudy had loved his parents' paintings when he was a boy. Of all the items in the secret stash that his father had left behind, he wanted to keep these and sister's dolls the most. But there was one problem. All these items technically belonged to the Czech government. That meant that he couldn't keep any of it. Although Rudy had to come to grips with the fact that by law he had been required to report his find to the authorities, he still walked away a happy man. Even though he couldn't keep any of his father's treasure, he was happy to have seen all the items that he had known when he was a boy. He's just happy to have some closure. This rare time capsule is destined to reside in a local museum in its entirety, where others will be able to view these fascinating relics and learn about what life was like in the 1940s. Rudy's father had even packed puzzles, socks, and baby clothes, creating a complete picture of everyday family life. But what makes Rudy's find so valuable to historians? Museum manager Václav Hofek said, "Such a complete finding of objects hidden by German citizens after the war is very rare in this region." It seemed as if Rudy's father had anticipated his family's return to their home much sooner than anyone had anticipated. But Rudy is not bitter about his family's treasures being seized by the museum. In fact, he has promised to help identify each item himself. In total, Rudy had found 70 packages of priceless artifacts and provided rare glimpses into the everyday life of the Czech citizens before World War II had started. When the war broke out, it caused enormous animosity from the Czech population toward the ethnic German population and the government. 1.6 million ethnic Germans were forcibly expelled from their homes into the American zone, West Germany. Thousands of people perished during this time. The lucky ones were the ones who were expelled into the American zone. Another 800,000 were sent to the Soviet zone. Rudy and his family were fortunate enough to be sent to the American zone, and his father had time to hide he and his family's possessions. Imagine being Rudy's family members during that time in history, going about your daily life as best you can, and then suddenly having your entire life uprooted and being forced to leave because of your nationality. Well, that's exactly what happened. Rudy's family had to leave everything. After going through all that, was it really fair that the government claimed the treasure? The museum posted dozens of pictures of all Rudy's family treasures on their Facebook page with a long caption explaining the circumstances of the objects. It says, "The unique discovery of the cache from 1945 took place on Tuesday, July the 28th in Lebešek in Ústek. Local resident Rudy Schlattner informed the municipal office that the objects his family had left behind after the end of the war were hidden under the roof of the kindergarten building." With the participation of the mayor of Lebúš, the headmistress of the kindergarten, an archaeologist from the Archaeological Institute of the Academy of Sciences, and 2 employees of the Museum of the City of Ústí nad Labem, the objects were picked up and taken to the Ústí Museum, the caption continues. But netizens from all around the world were not impressed with the story. Instead of marveling at the rare items, they took issue with the way the entire situation was dealt with and began to give the museum a piece of their mind. Some English-speaking Facebook users thought that it was entirely unfair for the state to claim Rudy's family's priceless antiques for their own after they had been through such hardships. One annoyed Facebook user wrote, "The Czech state expelled his family and stole his house. Couldn't they at least give him these souvenirs after 70 years?" Their further fate will be discussed in the coming days. The house in which the kindergarten is located today was built in 1928 to 1929 as a family villa by Rudy Schlottner's father, who was a wealthy businessman. The museum's Facebook post continues, translated from Czech. After the end of World War II, when the deportation of the German population began, the Schlottner family hid a large number of objects in a hiding place under the roof of the house. 13-year-old Rudy was also present during the hiding. It's a shame the state can claim the property that clearly belonged to Rudy Schlottner.